The tidal irrigation and electrical system is a renewable energy power plant. It derives its power ultimately from two sources, sunshine and the tidal flux. Anyone who has ever been to the beach has seen the tidal flux come in and go out. The tidal irrigation and electrical system can generate electricity, produce food, and the source material for biopetroleum, while at the same time taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It does this by harnessing the up and down motion of the surface of the ocean. The ocean reacts to sunlight in two ways. First, the surface gets warmer than the bottom. Second, marine plants begin to grow, if they can. These two statements are, of course, not the whole story. When the ocean is warmed by sunlight, it divides itself into sharply defined layers, called thermoclines. These thermocline layers can have currents moving in different directions from one another, and they hardly mix at all. This can have a profound effect on marine plants. Plants are affected by thermoclines because To illustrate, here is the life cycle of phytoplankton. As you can see, some of the nutrients represented by the excretion and dissolved organic carbon is released, but much of it falls below the layer of physical mixing. Once the organic material sinks below a certain level, it is effectively removed from the ecosystem. This nutrient leaching is the reason that the warm tropical oceans are crystal clear. There are no nutrients and so no plants to turn the water green. For the stronger the warming at the surface, the more thermoclines there are. It is also the reason why the polar oceans are so productive. In the winter, the thermoclines are absent, and so the surface is flooded with nutrients. But by mid-spring, the thermoclines are in place, and plant growth stops. There are certain places where ocean currents bring nutrients from the deep to the surface. These areas represent 90% of the biological activity in the ocean, yet cover less than 1% of its surface. Here is one off of the coast of southern Africa. These cold water upwellings are mimicked and harnessed by the tidal irrigation and electrical system. It reverses the nutrient flow by harnessing the tide. It uses the up motion of the tide at the surface to siphon water from the bottom of the ocean, water that is ice cold and the perfect medium for plankton and other marine plants to grow. The tidal irrigation and electrical system irrigates an artificial atoll with this deep ocean water, Dow. The amount of Dow that can be moved to the surface depends on the size of the tidal flux and the surface area of the lagoon of the artificial atoll. This means that the cost-effectiveness of the system increases as the area of the lagoon grows in size. The construction costs of the wall remain linear, meaning that they go up at a rate of 1 to 1, but the amount of Dow moved is 1 to 10. So for instance, if you had a tie system on a bit of continental shelf, and the tidal flux there was 2 meters, and the circumference of the atoll was 6.28 kilometers, it would bring up 6,283,185 cubic meters of Dow every flux. However, if the atoll was instead 62.8 kilometers in circumference, it would bring up 628,318,500 cubic meters of Dow. 10 times more Dow means 10 times more of everything. This means that, although the cost of building on the continental shelf is expensive, the system will become economic once it reaches a certain size. What that size is remains open for investigation. Electricity is generated primarily through two systems, tidal hydroelectric and Otec, but it is also possible to generate electricity using a tie system through the wind and waves. By encircling an area of continental shelf and channeling the up and down motion of the tide, it is possible to generate power, much as one would do in a hydroelectric dam. However, unlike in a dam, where the amount of power available to be generated is dependent on the difference between the height of the dam and its base, a tie system generates tidal electric power based on the area of the artificial atoll, multiplied by the difference between the low and high tide. A tie system generates tidal electric power based on the area of the artificial atoll, multiplied by the difference between the low and high tide. This is an important separation between a conventional dam and a tie system. It means that a tie system is increasingly efficient as it increases in size because it moves more water for less atoll wall. The largest potential energy source of the tie system is ocean thermal energy conversion, Otec. Otec has been around for a long time, and experiments conducted in Hawaii by the U.S. government have proved its potential. Otec generates electricity by exploiting the difference in temperature of water deep in the ocean, which is ice cold, and ocean water at the surface, which has been warmed by the sun. This is a typical Otec heat exchanger. Deep ocean water, DAO, is the cold component, condensing a working fluid, such as ammonia, which is heated by the surface water. The working fluid drives a turbine, generating electricity. Incorporating Otec into a tie system, this is how it looks. The discharge from the deep ocean water that is used as the cold component of Otec is sucked by tidal forces into the lagoon of the artificial atoll, where it can be used to grow food or converted to fuel. It turns out that the energy available to be exploited from a given area of ocean by Otec is roughly 10 times as great compared to the simple tidal flow of water through a turbine. And of course, the same economy of scale that happens as the lagoon grows in size affects Otec as well. Wind turbines and wave energy to electricity generators all require a rigid structure to which they are anchored. The tidal irrigation and electrical system provides this rigid structure, and therefore is ideal for concomitant use. The amount of energy available to be generated from these sources depends too much on local conditions to be estimated here. Plants form the basis of any food chain, and in the ocean, things are no different. In the marine food web, kelp, seagrass, and single-celled plants called phytoplankton provide the energy for all of the marine protein we as humans consume. Marine plants bloom in areas where nutrients are added to the water column, and the best nutrient mix comes from deep ocean water, DAO. 90% of the biologic activity in the ocean occurs when DAO is brought to the surface by tides and the Coriolis effect. The tidal irrigation and electrical system harnesses tidal forces by building an artificial atoll in order to siphon DAO up to the surface. The growth of fish and shellfish in a tie system is enormous. For example, in the section of this multimedia document called Potential Locations, a site off Florida is considered for a tie system. Back-of-envelope calculations suggest that this would annually produce about 1% of the yearly catch of the USA. Admittedly, this is a small amount when considering the investment, but when considered against the fact that this is in addition to all the other products produced by a tie system, it is an immense added value. Crude oil. Inducing the growth of phytoplankton in the tidal irrigation and electrical systems lagoon can ultimately lead to the production of biocrude. By looking at fossils, geologists have determined that the source of drilled crude oil is plankton. Millions of years ago, plankton would die and sink to the bottom, eventually getting covered by others of their kind. Over geologic time, and when the conditions are right, this would turn into oil. Amazingly, the same plankton species that inhabited the Earth millions of years ago are still with us. By growing them ourselves, we can speed up the geologic process that took millions of years into a few hours and convert plankton into oil. The potential is enormous when you consider these disparate facts. Compare and contrast the following source materials for biofuels. Due to economies of scale, fertilizing the lagoon of the artificial atoll increases in efficiency at a rate of 10 to 1 as the artificial atoll grows in size. Agricultural land and the water necessary to make it produce crops is already in short supply. The tidal irrigation and electrical system needs neither fresh water nor land. It is to be built on the virgin territory of the continental shelf. The method by which plankton is converted to oil in a tie system is fairly straightforward. When the tide is rising, 1. A pipe, 2. Sucks cold nutrient water from the depths of the ocean, 3. Into a lagoon, 4. Plankton begins growing in the lagoon. When the tide turns and begins to flow out of the lagoon, the pipe which brought the water from the depths of the ocean is closed. The other pipe leads to a filtration system, which, aided by tidal forces, removes the plankton from the water column. Once the plankton is concentrated, it can be shipped off to a processing plant, where it can be fully converted to whatever petrochemical is desired. Carbon credits. The growth of marine plants in the tidal irrigation and electrical systems lagoon absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Although a large proportion of this carbon dioxide will eventually be returned to the atmosphere after its use as food or fuel, some of it will be dissolved in the tidal discharge from the lagoon. These fragments of cells and other tiny bits of organic matter will eventually settle onto the seabed and be locked away for geologic time, perhaps becoming oil someday. This means that the tidal irrigation and electrical system is a carbon dioxide sink, and therefore not only offsets non-renewable energy generation sources, but also directly reduces atmospheric carbon dioxide, generating further carbon credits. Hydrogen. Pure hydrogen is generated by using electricity to break the chemical bonds which hold it to another atom. Typically, water is used because it is plentiful as a source material for pure hydrogen. The important fact is that hydrogen requires an initial input of electricity in order to be used as a fuel. The tidal irrigation and electrical system can generate electricity on a vast scale. However, many of the ideal locations for it are in areas far from industrial and urban centers. Due to resistance, power cables leak energy in the form of heat, and beyond a certain distance are impractical. In these isolated areas, it makes sense to use the potential energy of the electricity to generate pure hydrogen from the ocean's water, rather than use electrical cables to export the power. Once in pure form, the hydrogen can be pressurized and shipped by tanker or airship to any city in the world. No single invention will be able to meet the energy and biofuel demands of the world, but this system has the potential to meet large sectors of it. Due to an increase in efficiency as the system grows in size and the huge potential for the conversion of marine protein to crude oil, this system has the potential to meet the energy demands of industry in a green, renewable manner. It has the added advantage of being offshore and therefore reduces the strain on the crowded terrestrial environment. With no pre-feasibility studies conducted yet, it is difficult to estimate how big a particular tie system would need to be in order to return the investment of construction. However, consider the table presented here. Using conservative estimates, the entire world's demand for crude oil could be met by encircling 100,000 square kilometers of ocean and irrigating it with a tie system. That is roughly the size of South Korea. Constructing objects on this scale is difficult, of course, but not impossible. Consider 100,000 square kilometers next to the Florida coastline, or 100,000 square kilometers next to the coastline of Brazil. There are security structures of comparable scale in many places around the world. This is the Israeli security cordon. Its length is slightly smaller than the circumference of a tie system, large enough to generate current world demand for crude oil. Of course, an individual tie system need not be 100,000 square kilometers in order to be an economic investment. A back-of-envelope calculation estimates that a mere 50 square kilometer tie system could repay its investment in as little as 6 years. One last comparison. The Great Wall of China is 6,000 kilometers long and 12 meters high. If that 6,000 kilometers were converted into the circumference of a tie system, it would encircle 2,866,711 square kilometers. Based on rough calculations, that is 28 times the estimated world demand for fuel, and of course, fuel is only one of the products of a tie system. Cost. With no feasibility studies completed, it is difficult to estimate the cost of building a tie system. The structure would need to be robust enough to survive the conditions of the mid-continental shelf. Storms, tsunami, and in some places earthquakes are hazards that would need to be accounted for. However, even if these construction costs are very large, the efficiency of the system grows relative to construction costs. For example, imagine it costs an average of $400,000 to build a linear meter of artificial atoll wall, and the tie system was to be constructed in an area of ocean with a modest 2-meter tidal flux. A back-of-envelope calculation suggested it could repay construction costs in 7 years if the atoll was 126 kilometers in circumference. Every tidal flux, this tie system would produce 221,788 megawatt hours and 44,326 barrels of crude oil. So the construction costs can be recouped, and once they are, the system will continue to produce food and fuel as long as the sun and the moon are in the sky. The tidal irrigation and electrical system is patented in the United States, patent number 6863028. It was invented by and is solely owned by the person speaking to you now. I am Martin T. Sherman. To view the patent, go to www.uspto.gov and hit the link that says Search by Patent Number, and then enter 6863028, or go to www.myspace.com/CVAC. Potential locations. To maximize the potential of the invention, a tie system should be constructed on the continental shelf in the tropics. Luckily, there is a lot of this type of area. To understand why it is better to build a tie system in the tropics, consider that there is about 10 times the energy to be extracted from seawater that is 20 degrees Celsius warmer at the surface than at the bottom than from the tidal flow of water past turbines alone. Certain areas of continental shelf stand out more than others. They should suffer from moderate storms and limited hazards, or have huge tidal fluxes and so generate rapid returns on the investment of construction. In Florida, for instance, there is a large continental shelf with little danger from tsunami or other geologic activity, but it suffers from both regular hurricanes and a relatively small tidal flux. Nonetheless, if built large enough, it could still feasibly repay its investment in under 10 years. Based on a 1-meter tide, with each linear meter of artificial atoll wall costing $500,000, it would look like this compared to the Florida coastline. Back-of-envelope calculations suggest that this tie system would produce 57,624,534 barrels of oil and 279,875,700 megawatt-hours of electricity per year. A drop in the ocean in terms of meeting the oil demands of the USA, but delivering 14% of the entire electricity produced by that country in 2004. So the number of potential sites are vast, though some areas are better than others.